Okay, well, welcome back. My name is Reshla Laviva, and I am the director of tabletop panels at DragonCon. And here with me, as always, is Abby, my faithful and most trusted assistant. I could not do anything without you. I'm serious. Uh, so
Just happy to help.
today we're going to be talking about adventure paths and long form modules because that is actually the most requested thing that for our channel. Most people who have tuned in have asked, "Hey, can you tell us about running these?" And I looked it up on the internet and on the YouTubes, and there's scant information on running long form adventures. Excuse me, which I thought was very surprising because they're extremely popular. To understand, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on long form adventure paths and that sort of thing. Way back in the day, people asked for them, but modules never never sold very well. And a lot of times those modules didn't sell very well because they were meant to be sort of dropped into your existing campaign. And so if you bought a module, it was a lot of times it was hard to work it into your campaign because the modules were usually very specific. Well, in this village, there's this evil witch who's doing this, and they're doing it in this forest. Well, that village doesn't exist in my campaign, and it wouldn't fit. Like, it just doesn't fit the theme of my campaign, for example. And the forest you're talking about doesn't really fit in my campaign either. So a big example was a friend of mine way back in the day ran some adventures out of the good old Dragon magazine. And the adventure that we went on, we had to invade this giant floating diamond filled with kobolds who threw exploding diamonds at us. Well, I thought that was kind of weird and out there, and it didn't really fit in the campaign that we were in. With those super fantastic elements were not in the campaign that we were in. So that would be an example. But an adventure path, though, and this goes to why run one, starts from level 1 all the way to level 12 or sometimes even to level 20. So it gives you literally everything. So all the adventures in the adventure path fit together. They have the same theme. They draw from the same maps, and all the NPCs flow together, and it comes together as a cohesive whole. Now, a lot of people who I know like to play them, do them for a number of reasons. One, the people that I know that run adventure paths, they're not super creative writers. One guy that we couldn't live without, speaking of people we couldn't live without, is Patrick. And Patrick ran for us a great adventure path for Star Wars, for a previous edition of Star Wars. And it was literally from level 1 to level 20. And Patrick was a great GM, but he was not the strongest creative writer. He had all the other requisite skills, but he wasn't. He came up with his own adventure for us, which was great. But it took him weeks to come up with that one adventure, and we were done with it within like one night. So that wasn't his forte. His forte was in other things. So the adventure path was a perfect solution for him. And I run into people all the time who they have a hard time coming up with ideas, or they have a hard time keeping themselves organized. So an adventure path does all that for you. It also keeps things fair. If a lot of people, a lot of GMs can't identify this in themselves, but if you have a game master that makes up things too much, like you're walking in a dungeon and suddenly there's this huge dragon that burns the party to death, or you're doing something in a village, and in all this this was related to us in last DragonCon. There's all this burning, highly flammable fluid that's running through the city's sewer systems, and the whole city blows up, and the player characters are like, well, there's nothing we can do about this. And your GM kind of just goes off the rails all the time. In Adventure Path, if you introduce an Adventure Path to such a GM, they don't go off the rails as much because there's a rail for them to follow. Which is one reason that people shy away from them, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Another great thing for people, another great thing about Adventure Paths is that for me, if I've been gaming with somebody for a long time, I notice that they start to understand my ideas, and they understand the things that I'm always going to do when I run a game, and they start picking up on what I'm doing even before I finish. And sometimes even disastrously, they kind of start teasing me about certain things. They're like, "Oh, I bet I know that there's a woman in white on the other side of the door, isn't there?" And I'm like, "Well, yes, as a matter of fact, there is." Um, but if you run a module, then it's not you who's writing it. So that person, the writers, plural, in the module, don't draw from the same tropes. They have different ideas. Their pacing is different. So suddenly, the players on the other side of the table can't get burned out or tired of your style, right? You're still going to have your same game master style, of course, but there'll be new elements that will make your game fresh and new. And that's probably the strongest reason I recommend at least looking into Adventure Paths, because I've found it's really helped me in that regard. It really has helped me break out of my mold and do different things that I wouldn't normally do before, and plan different things that I normally wouldn't plan before. So, okay. And then finally, Adventure Paths are a great place to get new content. So a lot of long form adventures have setting information. A lot of them might even have new character options or monsters or whatnot. And you can kind of crib these from the adventure path that you bought, and that can be very useful. I found the setting information in a lot of adventure paths to be really useful, because I was like, well, I know a little bit about this setting, but not a lot. But here's this thing that really fleshes out the region, and so now I'm a little bit more know something a little better about that. Now, Abby, I know that you said you really wanted to run Phandelver.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why is that?
Mostly because it is one that a lot of people seem familiar with, and I'm not. And I would love to run it so I can actually get cozy with it and know what we're all talking about. I've listened to people play, in the Adventure Zone, they play the first segment of it, but they never finish it, as far as I'm aware. I think there's more to it past the bugbear. And it may have been Gabe Hicks. It was somebody on Twitter a while ago that made a comment about having run it before and never finished it. So that seems to be a common thing. And so it's I really want to play it so I know it, and I want to finish it to kind of say I've done it.
That is one of the hard parts about running long form adventures. Are you going to finish it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or it's discouraging to think that, well, I might run this thing, it might be cool, but what if it never gets done? And that is something to be cognizant of.
Right.
If you know your group and you know the campaign's probably not going to last past 4 sessions, then yeah, you're probably not going to be able to do that. But what you can do is, maybe if I were in your shoes and I really wanted to run something already done, what I would do is I would take, let's say, Phandelver, and then lift that first part off, and then do hey, the Adventure Zone guys did this, I want to do it too. Mm-hmm. Right? And just run that first part knowing that's all you're ever going to do. Right?
Right.
Another thing, and well, let's go ahead and get into some of the tips that I have for running long form adventures, is that it's okay to splice or change the adventure path. A lot of people will run these modules and they'll be like, well, the module specifically says blank, so I have to do that. You don't. You can change it up. You're meant to change it up. The people writing it expect you to change it up, and that's okay. So, for example, a really good example I have that I give all the time is that I was running a Starfinder adventure for my kids, and there was this big, huge dungeon that they had to crawl through in a Starfinder, and they were pretty high level at this point, and they were like, "Dad, don't we have a spaceship?" I'm like, "Yeah, you do, with missiles and lasers." I'm like, yeah, you do. Why don't we just get in the spaceship, fly over the dungeon, and then where the bad guy is, we'll shoot missiles down on that and then fly in and attack the bad guy. I'm like, you can absolutely do that. Yeah, well, let's do that. And then so we did it that way. And that's okay. You don't have to force your players to go through that dungeon because the module said so. Another thing I've done, more to the point of what I'm talking about with the splicing, I was running an adventure very recently, and the dungeon that we're supposed to go through was very tedious, and I could see that. So what I did was I had them go through the first part. I just chopped out the middle bit where it was tedious, and then I moved the end encounter up closer to where the beginning is, and voila! I just there you go. Now the dungeon takes 2 sessions instead of 10 sessions. If that is one of your concerns, I do have several groups though that really love the dungeon crawly thing. They want to go through long dungeons, take multiple sessions, and have to camp in the dungeon and all that. So adventure paths are fantastic for those kind of players who want that kind of crunchy dungeon crawly experience. Mm-hmm. But if you have a group of people who don't, I would literally just if you have people where dungeons give people a headache, I would literally have them go through like just 3 or 4 rooms, splice it, and then put the final encounter towards the beginning. And if the final encounter is just way too tough, I would understandably tone it down. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's some tips for running long form adventures. Now, Abby, let me ask you about Phandelver. So it seems like you've heard all these other people play Phandelver, and you've always wanted to do something like that. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of people want to play these big adventures, because it's a shared experience.
Right.
Right. They've heard about other people doing it, and they want to well, I want to see that movie too, or I want to read that book too. Do you think you would ever have a group that could go through, let's say, 4 or 5 sessions of that adventure?
At some point, yeah.
Okay, cool.
What I run into the most is definitely scheduling issues, because when I do short campaigns, like whether that be 4 sessions or 10 sessions, I don't like to go without a player because we only have so much time together, and I don't want them to feel like they missed out on something important from the previous session. And so a lot of times that game will get, like, that second session, that third session will get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back because someone's having a bad brain day. Okay, no problem. We'll just push it back. Someone can't get out of work on time. Okay, no problem. We'll just push it back. And then we just never get around to it because then it's months later and we've all kind of forgotten about it. Right.
My advice for adventure paths, because we've run the same thing with our players, we do Forge Ahead. Mm-hmm. And there are various mechanics to do that. The most popular mechanic is that you assume that the character is there, but they're kind of on remote control. They might contribute a little bit, but they don't do a whole bunch. And the movie The Gamers makes fun of that really hardcore. Like they have all these people in costume going through the woods doing what D&D characters do, and the one character is there like frozen, and then like every once in a while the frozen character will do like one thing, and then so that's how they kind of make fun of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something?
One thing that I try to do in a lot of my games, campaigns, short form, long form, whatever, is to have like a home base and make these sessions very episodic, because if there's a home base they can land at, whether that be a tavern, a fort, anything, then whoever can't make it can, be sick or have overslept, or, they're just out in town doing some shopping, but then the rest of the party gets this, like, we have to go do the thing now. So we'll just grab them an update when we get back. Like, not a big deal.
I really like that solution a lot. I've done that sort of solution, and I agree. I think that's a better one, because then somebody doesn't show up in the middle of an adventure and they don't know what's going on. You're back at home, and then you start to write them back into the adventure. Well, somebody comes to you with a message. You have to go to this thing, and then they can even have a very short solo adventure getting to where everybody else is, and the rest of the table kind of laughs and laughs and giggles at all the shenanigans they have to go through to get to where the party is, that kind of thing. So, no, I like that solution a lot. But in my experience with an adventure path, you have to kind of forge ahead because of just what you said. Because there's so many sessions, if you put it off, it starts to fall apart. So I usually forge ahead. I even have a critical mass rule. Like, we can be missing 2 people, but once we're down, like, but 3 is the minimum, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, like, that's your critical mass. But okay.
And I think that depends on the size of your party too.
Yes.
Like, if you're used to operating with 4, you can't lose more than 1 because then you're down half your party.
Yep.
Unless you want to do it, like the field trips with Zuko from Avatar: Last Airbender, where you just have Zuko and somebody else go, and then everyone else gets left.
Right.
You can do like a mini adventure like that, but then we're off course.
Right. To your point, what you can kind of do with your adventure paths is to try to make them episodic, even if they're not. So if they're in the middle of something, then if they're at a village and they're traveling to get to another village, you can say, all right, we stop for the night, and you camp at this tiny little hamlet. There's a nice little family, and the next time, if someone can't make it, well, you're still back at the hamlet,
right,
helping out with that family, that kind of thing. So, but I would highly recommend just what you said if you have scheduling problems.
Yeah, you can, at the mouth of a cave, someone can be like, okay, I'm going to go see if there's another entrance that they can get out of and just meet you in the middle. They finally come back. Well, wow, you found the entrance. You're met in the middle.
Right. Also, going into the dungeon aspect thing again, to kind of go back to that a little bit. If you have a group of people who do not like dungeon crawling hardly at all, what I have usually done with adventure paths, and this has really worked for me very well, is I look at the dungeon as a whole, and I'm like, okay, what is the idea behind this dungeon? So, for example, let's say it's an ice dungeon with a bunch of ice monsters, and they constantly freeze you, and the ground is slippery, and you're constantly having to be careful so you don't slip and fall. And
time ice caverns.
Right. Then what I usually would do if I had a group that does not really like dungeon crawls, is I would have them go through, say, 4 rooms of that dungeon and have those elements strongly presented so they get the idea, the feel of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that's it. Once you got through these 3-4 rooms, you get to your objective, whatever that is. I just lift a tiny, tiny bit of the dungeon to give them that taste. And I find that usually works. And I find often with groups that don't like dungeon crawling, it works really well, because that means, yes, the adventure path is much, much shorter, but that's what that group wanted anyway.
Right.
That's the kind of group that didn't want a really, really long, 20, 40 session adventure. They didn't want that. They want something like 10 sessions. And so that works anyway. Another tip or advice I would give about running adventure paths or long-form modules would be the one weakness that most adventure paths have, not all, but one that they most have, is the villains are usually not properly presented.
Okay.
So, for example, at the beginning, there are 2 chapters in Rise of the Runelords, which is a great adventure path, with very complex, rich, and interesting villains, but you don't really meet them until the final encounter. So you kind of get the history of some of the villains throughout the adventure. There's a mystery, and as you're going through the mystery, you discover a little bit about the villain's background, but never a ton. So at the end of it, you've found out about this person, but you're fighting them, and I would strongly recommend sprinkling the villain throughout the main villain that they're going to come up and fight throughout the adventure path, and give the player characters a really good reason to hate them.
Mm-hmm.
So the villains can have a henchman.
To sympathize if we want one of those.
Yeah, or to sympathize, or at least understand where they're coming from. So they can have henchmen arrive. You can have lots of hints and clues about what happened to them in the past. My favorite, of course, is having them meet the villain, either because the villain, when they first meet the villain's not opposed to them. They just happen to be in the same place as the player characters, and their goals are not butting up against each other right now. So, oh, you're in this tavern. Tell me what you've done. Oh, I've kind of done this sort of thing, and then have them have a nice conversation. And so later on, they're like, that guy, that person, I can't believe it. That kind of thing. So, or have, of course, the good old trope of having the villain appear in such a way that the party can't get to them, like in an illusion. If the party is low level enough, have the villain on this other side of a canyon where they're like can talk to the party, but party can't really reach them. There's a number of ways to do that, but most adventure paths I know of, they're like just don't have really good ways of encountering the villain beforehand. So a great example of that would be the first chapter of The Mummy's Mask has a fantastic villain, and like a big, long, full page of backstory. But you meet them briefly, and then in the final encounter, that's really it. So I had the villain appear over and over and over and over in the module in various circumstances, and they're like they're supposed to be basically a rival. They're the head of a rival adventuring group, and so the rival adventuring group would just kind of show up doing their own adventuring things. They wouldn't be opposed to the PCs. They weren't trying to do anything that the PCs would get mad at them about, but they would just kind of keep showing up, and then finally, they had the final encounter. But to that point too, just like in a Hollywood movie, a villain does not have a lot of screen time in which to impress upon you why you should care. One other flaw about the first chapter of The Mummy's Mask was they gave us a group adventuring party made up of 4 people. All 4 people had like page-long backstories. There's no way you could get into all that. So I just focused on the one character. So Abby, if you were going to do Phandelver, let's say you had a dedicated group, how long do you think you would need? How many sessions do you think you would need to do that?
It's been a while since I've looked at it, but to my memory, the module suggests like 8 sessions. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you could do 8 sessions, or do you think you would have to run it in like 4 or 5?
As far as like to run the whole thing, I would probably shoot for 10. Just to have a little bit of wiggle room, and I would say 10. If you finish it in 8, great. And it depends on the group of whether or not I would need to shorten that. If it was one of my like more unseasoned TTRPG friends, a group of those folks, then I'd probably have to keep it down to 2, 3, 4, maybe even 1, so I can like get them and keep them for a little bit. I think telling my new tabletop friends that have never played or have maybe only dabbled in it like once or twice and had a bad experience, like, yeah, we're going to go for 8 to 10 sessions might be daunting to them.
Right.
But for my friends that are a little more veteran in tabletops, I think 8 or 10 would be perfectly normal for them.
If you were going to shorten it, how do you think you would do that?
I haven't looked that deeply at it because I've never had the realistic window to play it. So I haven't looked that deeply into it.
Okay.
I haven't started breaking it up in segments.
Right. No, just
going back to our how do you prep for a session with my Google Doc full of notes.
Right. So let's say you have, we've been talking about people who would want something shorter. Let's go ahead and talk about the people who want to run who are into like really crunchy dungeons, and they don't mind playing a 20, 40, 50 session game or whatever, which I have plenty of groups that do that as well. So my best advice for that is definitely, obviously you need to prep. Obviously you need to read the module ahead of time. But I find it's really funny to say, but though that's an of course, but I need to really stress that you need to do that. There's so many times I've seen other people, they're running a module and they flip to, this was an actual incident. So they flip to a page and they're like, we were in a room in a dungeon, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. There are 4 ogres in here and they attack you immediately. What? We were like, because he hadn't read the module and he was just kind of like winging it.
Yeah.
Don't do that. It is so tempting, especially because people are busy with jobs and life and all that kind of stuff. It is so tempting. And because they're like, well, it's already written for me, right? You're like, oh, I can just skim it.
In the experiences I have had running pre-made modules and just homebrewing something, I have felt so much more need to prep when it is preset, because there are story beats we have to hit somehow or another, and I have to know what those are so that even when the players go off the rails, or if I'm the one playing it, the GM goes off the rails, I can guide us back to it.
I agree very much. I think it's just right.
But if I'm making it up, it doesn't matter. We don't have a story beat we have to hit.
Right. No, I agree very much. Like, so for example, if it looks like tonight in this session, we're not going to hit that story beat, I'll move the story beat up and I'll chop out something or something. So I agree very much. And also a lot of adventure paths are set in towns or villages or cities even. And if somebody wants to go off and explore this part of the city, I need to be prepared and go, okay, yeah, you go by the city and you see the monument of this person and you pass by the ancient tombs of this. I have to know that. Because if I make it up in that session and then we go back, and let's say they go back to that same section of the city, if I go back to what's written in the module, it's no good to me, because I overwrote it. So that's one big advice for people who want to take the crunchy approach. Another big piece of advice I would give is that for long form adventure paths, I've found that you often have to look at the treasure that you're giving to the PCs very carefully to make sure they're getting enough or too much. Funny enough, in the Pathfinder adventure paths that I've run, usually they're not getting enough treasure. We were like halfway through Rise of the Rune Lords, and the party had next to no super equipment of any kind. And the encounters were being designed for people they assumed had super equipment. So I had to make up things to give them. But what was kind of fun too, though, because we're running a long form adventure path, the items I gave to them I could tie directly into the setting or to the adventure path. So for example, if we were playing Curse of Strahd, there's all kinds of cool items that are already in that module or that you could design to really fit that module, like the Mace of the Mists or Sergei's bloody chainmail shirt, that kind of thing, that you could really, really attach and dress up to the adventure path. And even as you're progressing through the adventure path, the items that you have might have come to have more and more meanings. So in the case of the Curse of Strahd, of course kills his brother Sergei, because he really wants his bride. Well, if you find Sergei's bloody chain shirt, as the adventure progresses, you begin to realize that the armor that you're wearing has more and more consequence and more meaning. How much do you know about Curse of Strahd, by the way?
I know that there's vampires. I know that it's very popular, and I know that it's very dark.
That's okay. So it's Curse of Strahd. Let me tell you about that just really quick. Let me sell you on that. Curse of Strahd is probably one of the most...
You had me at vampires.
Okay. Gotcha. Curse of Strahd is one of the most popular adventure paths of all time right now. Like, it was published years ago, and it's still very popular. Because what is cool about Curse of Strahd is the plot is not pre-scripted. You're kind of in a giant sandbox, and you have a lot more freedom to go to this place or that place Now they give you clues as to where you would like to go, or this might be. It would be nice if you go here, but you can literally wander around the map and you won't lose the plot. It is excellently designed. So highly recommended, especially for that reason. And if people are a little bit leery because they're like, well, I don't want to be strapped to a railroad, you don't have to worry about that with Curse of Strahd. And another tip and a piece of advice I have for long form adventure paths is that a lot of times you can rob great ideas from them. I'm running a Ravenloft campaign right now, and they went into Barovia, where it's Curse of Strahd is set, but we didn't play through the whole adventure. I had them go to there's this really creepy abbey that they went to, not on the screen, but there's this really creepy old monastery / abbey that's in the right. That's in the module, and I just lifted it out of the adventure path, and then they explored it, and it was super creepy, and it was one of the highlights of the campaign. And we didn't have to play the whole adventure path. I just used that portion of it. So that's a great thing that adventure paths can be used for as well. One thing that is fun to do with adventure paths too, this is something that I've done before, is you can even change the setting. If you scrub off for a lot of the monsters and module, the encounters and monsters and the cities and towns, you can a lot of times scrape off a lot of the window dressing and then put it in a new setting. I ran Rise of the Runelords in an Irish setting.
Cool.
And they had to deal with the only High King of in Ireland that they've ever known in not super ancient history was Brian Boru. And so they dealt with the High King of Ireland and his court, and I incorporated him in the module. And if you read Rise of the Runelords, it has nothing to do with any of that. And so we put a lot of the high Irish traditions in there. And then if you were a bard in the setting, that meant totally different things, because that means you were an honored and treasured, valuable person of the court. And it really altered a lot of the themes of the module. But I changed the setting entirely. And what I'm going to say is, don't be afraid to do that. And then my final piece of advice for running long form modules is that look for great opportunities to bring them back around with your party. If you're running an adventure path that's going to take 40, 50, even more sessions to run, you'll be surprised that your players attaching themselves to certain NPCs. So in the very beginning of Rise of the Runelords, there's an encounter where you can meet the barkeep's daughter in the back, and she tries to romance you. Mm-hmm. And while this is happening, you can get caught by the barkeep, and he's like really mad. What are you doing? Da, 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 da. And you have to kind of sort it out. You have to, and the module does not tell you how to sort it out. It's just like you have to sort it out. Well, what's kind of cool was one of my players said, no, all my intentions here are completely honest. They continued the relationship. They ended up getting married. Okay, and because this is an Irish setting, all right?
Adorable.
One of the big bad NPCs said, I can make things way easier for you, but you have to give me something important of yours. And the guy just kind of forgot for a minute that he had a family, just for a second. And he was like, yeah, okay, I'll give you something important of mine. And he looked, the Fae looked at him and said, the most important thing to you. And he's like, I'm ready. I need to make the sacrifice so that we can proceed with the adventure. And then the Fae said, very well, when your firstborn daughter is born, you'll have to give her unto me. And he was like, because he didn't even know his wife was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so that created that huge moment. But at the end, what's kind of cool is his daughter came back, of course, from the Feylands, all grown up, and then was like what was like an aid in the final battle and that kind of thing.
Or did she?
Right. But it ended up being a very poetic moment.
That's cute. I like that.
And then his character grew too, right?
Mm-hmm.
From that, he was playing this sort of wild, carefree guy, and then became very honorable and serious and that sort of thing.
I'm a family man now.
Right. But that wasn't in the module. That what happened was, well, no, actually it was. It was this chance encounter in the module that blossomed into something else. So my advice for long form adventures is to look for those moments and then be like, aha, I'm going to seize on that. And then we're going to continue it through the game. That can happen with NPCs. That can happen with moments, all kinds of stuff. So any comments or questions that you have, Abby?
I mean, not without just like picking your brain more about individual modules, but
well, go ahead. We have a little bit of time. But ask any individual module question or whatever.
So one thing I understand about Curse of Strahd is that because it is so dark, it is definitely one of those that like requires a lot of like session zero, like what are your triggers? Is this the game for you? Kind of.
I don't find that it's very triggering. It is creepy. It's a horror module. It's a horror campaign. But I don't find it's very triggering, especially because that whole adventure does a good job of mixing it up so that you're not constantly in the dark all the time. But a lot of it can get very dark and depressing. So a lot of it is up to the game master. And this is, I think was a great question, to add moments of levity and comedy and that sort of thing. Because I find I've run horror campaigns before, and horror campaigns can get so dark that you're just like, oh, why am I doing this again? Everything we do is just tragic and depressing. So I make it a point to add moments of levity and even humor, or make it kind of fun, because you have to be especially in a horror game, there has to be something that you're fighting for. And if you don't value anything around you, you're not really fighting for anything. You're just kind of doing the module because you're supposed to be doing the module.
I think it kind of runs into the problem of like the player that's like, why am I hanging out with this party? And it's like, well, because you want to play D&D with your friends. Like,
right. So no, I didn't find it very triggering or anything like that. But I have that's a whole nother conversation that we might perhaps need to have.
Fair enough.
Is part 2 of Reading the Room, because I find the players are usually triggered by something that you have not even gone over, because it didn't occur to you and it didn't occur to them.
Right, which we've talked about in our episode Reading the Room. Right.
But I think we could get more depth than that. But anyway, you were saying.
One other question is, what is your favorite module that you've run?
Oh wow, there's I don't know if there's a favorite, but there are some that are like in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Well, actually, no. I'm gonna take that back. Probably my favorite long form module that I've ever run. Return to the Tomb of Horrors. Okay. And lots of very famous designers love that adventure. The adventure. So for one, the reason Return to the Tomb of Horrors is great is that you can literally be any alignment and you can still play that game.
Cool. Okay.
The reason is, the premise is this. There's this Lich, Asarak. He is going to take over the negative energy plane and supplant the entire negative energy plane with his own personality. If he does this, the entire world will become nothing but undead minions. And all of those undead minions will get their personalities and identities replaced with his. So it'll be like a planet full of 7 million Asaraks. So even if you're chaotic evil, if you don't do this thing, you will lose your identity, you will become undead, and that's it. You lose your whole existence. So, and if these people don't make it to the finish line with you, the same thing will happen. So everybody is highly motivated to do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started, I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter what adventure, what alignment you are. It really doesn't matter. They're like, really? I'm like, yes. And then when we started going, they were like, okay, no, you're right. It doesn't matter how evil I am. I want to see this through, and I want to make sure that everybody else crosses the finish line, because otherwise, all of existence will end, including me. So that's one thing that's great about Return of the Tomb of Horrors. Another thing is it's just a wonderful module. It is dark. It is deep. The artwork is amazing. There's a cool puzzle that requires like a disc, and so it has cool tchotchkes with it. The dungeons that are in it are very different. Each one is very different from the other. You don't ever feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. The encounters are well designed, and in the Tomb of Horrors is probably the most infamous dungeon in D&D because it's really deadly. There's so many things that will instantly kill you in that dungeon. But if you don't touch anything, we found it's very doable. So in the module, the party just didn't touch anything, and so they didn't run into a lot of the traps. But it's really cool, and it's very strong nostalgia bait to be like, hey, you are in the original Tomb of Horrors from way back in the 70s, and hey, you did it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's why I would say Return of the Tomb of Horrors is probably my favorite of all those.
I think that works well with the, that why am I traveling with this party problem? Right. Because you don't have to get along with them. It's self-preservation.
Right. It's like the Suicide Squad, right? Like, sure. There's a bomb in your brain, and if you don't do this and get along with everyone, then the bomb will blow up.
Yeah.
Another great module, and this is not a long form module, but another great module that I'd highly recommend for everybody is the original I6 Ravenloft module. You can run that in one night.
Oh, hell yeah.
You can run it in like 3, but you can also run it in 1. I've run it multiple times in one night. And that is a good way to kind of get, that's a good one to, I've never run a module before. I wonder what it's like. That's a good one to do.
How many hours would you say that one is?
It's a good 4 hour.
Okay.
It's a good 4 hour. But what's good about that is that even though it was written for first edition to AD&D, if you look at it and kind of, you can, again, scrub off the serial numbers, you can make it 5th edition or whatever edition you want it to make.
Is there a Ravenloft module for 5th? I'm pretty sure there is, isn't there?
Yeah, that Curse of Strahd.
Oh, okay. That one is Ravenloft. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought they were different.
No, that is Ravenloft. And you can just do the Castle Ravenloft from that module, and Bob's your uncle. Or what I would highly recommend is do the Abbey or the Haunted Monastery.
The Abbey sounds really cool. I mean,
yeah. But there are, what is really cool about the Abbey is not only is it horrific and creepy, it makes the players, I'm not going to say anything else about it to spoil it, it makes the players really ask themselves deep moral questions. Because is the Abbey evil or not? Is what's going on at the Abbey evil and sinister or not? Is the question. It's really creepy. It's really horrific. But they had to ask themselves some hard questions as to, is this cool or not cool? Mm-hmm. And that's why the whole thing was fantastic. And that can definitely be run in the evening.
Nice.
Easily.
I love that. There's my Halloween plans. Yeah,
there you go. That would be perfect to run for Halloween. So I think that is all the time that we have for today. So to everybody, I will leave you with this. Dice were rolled, roles were played, play was fun, and what else is there in life if not play? We'll see you next time.